There are moments in life that arrive quietly, without warning, yet carry the power to alter everything that comes after. For Aaliyah Brooks, that moment came on a gray Monday morning when she stood at the tall iron gates of the Kang estate, clutching a small suitcase and a folded employment letter that felt heavier than paper should. She had traveled far to get here, not just in distance but in circumstance. The job posting had seemed almost unreal when she first read it. Live-in maid needed. Competitive salary. Immediate start. Aaliyah hadn't questioned why such a wealthy household was recruiting so quietly. She had only seen the number attached to the offer and thought of her mother's medical bills, her younger brother's school fees, and the shrinking balance in her bank account. The gates opened smoothly, silently, as if the house itself had been expecting her. The mansion beyond them was vast and modern, all glass walls and clean lines, surrounded by carefully trimmed greenery that looked too perfect to be real. Aaliyah swallowed hard. She had cleaned expensive homes before, but this was different. This wasn't just a house, it was a world she didn't belong to. Inside, everything echoed. Her footsteps sounded too loud on the polished floors. A senior housekeeper, Mrs. Han, greeted her with a nod and immediately began explaining rules, schedules, and expectations. Her voice was firm but not unkind. Aaliyah listened carefully, committing every word to memory. She had learned long ago that mistakes were more costly when you were replaceable. Mr. Kang doesn't like disturbances, Mrs. Han said as they walked down a long hallway. He works late. He eats alone. And he values privacy. Aaliyah nodded. Privacy she could do. Silence she had mastered. They stopped in front of a wide door at the end of the hall. That is his study, Mrs. Han added. You will clean it every morning. If he's inside, you wait. Aaliyah agreed, even though the idea of cleaning the personal space of a billionaire made her nervous. Kang Joon-Woo was a name she recognized instantly. Everyone did. He was everywhere. Business magazines, online headlines, whispered conversations. A tech billionaire. Young. Handsome. Known almost as much for his wealth as for his reputation as a charming playboy. She didn't expect to meet him on her first day. It happened by accident. Later that afternoon, while carefully dusting a set of shelves in the study, Aaliyah assumed the room was empty. The door had been open. The lights were off. She moved quietly, focused on her task, until a voice spoke behind her. You're new. She turned so quickly she nearly dropped the cloth in her hand. Kang Joon-Woo stood near the door, tall and composed, wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His expression was unreadable, his dark eyes assessing her without warmth or hostility, just distance. I'm sorry, Aaliyah said immediately, lowering her gaze. I didn't know anyone was in here. It's fine, he replied calmly. His voice was smooth, controlled. Mrs. Han hired you? Yes, sir. He nodded once as if filing the information away, then walked past her without another word. No lingering glance. No curiosity. Just indifference. The door closed behind him, leaving the room quiet again. Aaliyah let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was it. Their first meeting. Brief. Uneventful. Forgettable. Or so she thought. Over the next few days, Aaliyah settled into the rhythm of the house. Wake early. Clean quietly. Avoid attention. She noticed patterns, how Mr. Kang left before sunrise and returned long after sunset, how his meals went untouched when he worked late, how laughter never echoed through the halls. She also noticed something else. Despite the luxury, the house felt lonely. Sometimes as she set a tray down outside his study late at night, she could hear him inside, typing endlessly, pacing, sighing. It reminded her that wealth didn't always come with peace. One evening as she passed him in the hallway, he paused. You're doing well, he said simply. It wasn't praise, not really. But it was acknowledgement. Aaliyah smiled politely. Thank you, sir. As she walked away, she didn't know it yet, but that quiet exchange marked the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. A connection born not of wealth or status, but of shared silence and unspoken understanding. Sometimes the most life-changing stories don't begin with sparks or grand gestures. Sometimes they begin with a job, and two lonely people learning how to be seen. People often believe they understand a man once they've seen his face enough times on magazine covers. They think headlines can explain a life. They think wealth tells the whole story. Aaliyah Brooks had believed that once too, until she began working inside Kang Joon-Woo's home. From the outside his life looked loud. Inside the mansion it was painfully quiet. Days passed with little change. Joon-Woo left before dawn and returned well after nightfall. His suits were always pressed, his shoes lined up perfectly by the door. Yet there was something unfinished about him, something restless that lingered in the air long after he passed through a room. Aaliyah noticed these things because noticing was part of survival. When you worked in someone else's home, you learned to read the invisible moods, silences, tensions. And Mr. Kang's silence spoke more loudly than most. She learned his habits without meaning to. He drank coffee black, often forgetting to finish it. He preferred meals simple, barely touched when he was deep in thought. His study was immaculate, but the trash bin beneath his desk was always overflowing with discarded notes, plans rewritten again and again. One evening, while clearing the dining table, Aaliyah realized he was still seated there, staring at his phone. He hadn't eaten more than a few bites. "Sir," she said carefully, keeping her tone professional, "shall I clear the rest?" He looked up as if surprised to see her. For a moment, something flickered across his face, fatigue, maybe even relief, but it vanished just as quickly. "Yes, thank you." As she gathered the dishes, she couldn't help but notice the faint tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he read whatever was on the screen. This wasn't the carefree playboy the internet talked about. This was a man carrying too much on his own. Later that night, as Aaliyah passed the study, she heard voices. Not laughter. Not celebration. Anger. She paused without meaning to. The door wasn't fully closed. "I said I'm handling it," Joon-Woo snapped into the phone. His voice was sharp now, stripped of its usual calm. "You don't get to decide my life for me." A brief silence followed. Then quieter, heavier words. "I did everything you asked. Everything. And it was never enough." Aaliyah froze. She knew she should walk away. Privacy mattered here. But something in his voice, strained, wounded, rooted her to the spot. "I'm tired," he continued. "I'm not a headline. I'm not a strategy." The call ended abruptly. Aaliyah stepped back just as the door opened. Joon-Woo emerged, stopping short when he saw her standing there. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I was just," she began, flustered. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he said quickly, though his eyes told a different story. There was no anger in them. Just exhaustion. An awkward silence stretched between them. "You work late," Aaliyah said before she could stop herself. He let out a quiet breath. "So do you." It wasn't much, but it was the first time he'd spoken to her without distance. Without title or command. Just observation. That night marked a shift, subtle but real. After that, their conversations grew slightly longer. Still careful. Still respectful. But human. Sometimes he'd ask her how her day was. Sometimes she'd remind him to eat. They never crossed lines, but they stood closer than before, bound by a quiet understanding neither named. Aaliyah began to see the contrast more clearly. The man the world celebrated was charming, untouchable, always smiling for cameras. The man who lived in this house was thoughtful, guarded, and deeply alone. And Joon-Woo in turn began to notice her. Not just as a maid moving silently through his home, but as a presence that softened the edges of his day. Her calm voice. Her patience. The way she listened without trying to fix him. One evening as he passed her in the hallway he paused. "You don't treat me differently," he said. She blinked, surprised. "I treat you with respect, sir." A small, almost sad smile touched his lips. "That's rare." In that moment, something shifted between them, not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people seeing past appearances. Two lives brushing against each other in a house full of quiet. And without realizing it, Aaliyah Brooks was no longer just cleaning a billionaire's home. She was beginning to understand the man behind the headlines. Not all connections are built through grand gestures. Some are formed in the quiet moments most people overlook. In a warm cup of tea left untouched, in a chair pulled out without being asked, in the simple act of noticing. For Aaliyah Brooks, kindness had always been practical, not emotional. It was something you did because the world rarely offered it freely. She didn't realize she was changing Kang Joon-Woo's life one small act at a time. It started without intention. One evening she noticed his coffee sitting cold on the desk again, untouched. The next night she replaced it with tea instead, something gentler, less demanding. She left it there without a note, without expectation. When she returned to collect the tray hours later, the cup was empty. The following morning she found the mug washed and placed neatly beside the sink. That became their silent routine. Aaliyah didn't ask if he liked the tea. Joon-Woo didn't thank her every time. But somehow the exchange felt more meaningful than words. It was an understanding that existed quietly between them. As days passed, Aaliyah began to notice how much pressure hung over him. He moved through the house like someone always late for something unseen. His phone rarely left his hand. His shoulders never fully relaxed, so she adjusted what she could. She organized his workspace in ways that made sense. She placed documents in neat stacks. She opened the curtains just enough to let in light without distraction. These were small things, things no one would ever praise her for, but they mattered. Joon-Woo noticed. One afternoon he stood in the doorway of the study, watching her straighten a shelf. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. She turned, surprised to find him there. "It's part of my job." He shook his head slightly. "No. This feels thoughtful." The word lingered between them. "I like things to feel easier when I leave a room," she replied honestly. "It helps me breathe." He considered that, then nodded. I understand." From that moment on he began to linger more. He didn't rush past her in hallways anymore. He asked questions, not invasive ones but careful ones. "How long have you worked here? Do you miss home? What do you do when you're not working?" Aaliyah answered cautiously at first. She spoke about her love for quiet mornings, about cooking simple meals, about wanting stability more than excitement. She didn't mention her fears. She didn't talk about how close she'd come to losing everything before this job. Joon-Woo listened. That alone felt rare. One night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Aaliyah found him standing in the kitchen, staring at nothing. She hesitated before speaking. "Would you like dinner now, sir?" He looked up slowly. "Would you sit and eat with me?" The question stunned her. "I'm not sure that's appropriate." "I don't mean as an order," he said quickly. "Just company." After a long pause she nodded. They sat across from each other at the large table, the space between them filled with quiet rather than discomfort. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence felt different now, less heavy, more shared. For the first time in a long while, Joon-Woo finished his meal. Afterward, as they stood to clear the table, he hesitated. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the food. For everything." Aaliyah offered a small smile. "You're welcome." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Aaliyah." It was the first time he'd said her name. She turned back. "I hope you know," he said softly, "you matter here." The words caught her off guard. No employer had ever said that to her before. She nodded, unsure how to respond, then left the room before emotion could betray her composure. That night, Aaliyah lay awake longer than usual. And somewhere down the hall, Kang Joon-Woo did the same, both of them aware that something gentle and unexpected was taking shape. Not love. Not yet. Just kindness finding its way into two guarded hearts. There are walls people build not to keep others out, but to keep themselves from breaking. Kang Joon-Woo's walls were quiet, carefully constructed over years of expectation, disappointment, and solitude. From the outside they looked like confidence. From the inside they felt like exhaustion. Aaliyah didn't set out to tear those walls down. She only stood close enough for the cracks to show. It happened during one of his worst weeks. A major deal fell apart unexpectedly, and the pressure that followed filled the house with a tension Aaliyah could feel even without being told. Phone calls grew sharper. Meals went untouched again. Sleep became optional. Late one evening, as Aaliyah finished tidying the living room, she noticed the lights still on in the study. It was past midnight. She hesitated, then knocked softly. No answer. She opened the door just enough to see Joon-Woo sitting at his desk, head bowed, hands pressed against his temples. Papers were scattered everywhere, a rare sign of disorder. "Sir?" she said gently. He didn't look up. "I'm fine." The words sounded automatic, rehearsed. Aaliyah stepped inside anyway, keeping a respectful distance. "You've been saying that all week," she replied softly. For a long moment he remained still. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled deeply, as though the air had been trapped in his chest for days. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted quietly. "If I slow down, everything falls apart." Aaliyah didn't interrupt. She didn't offer solutions. She simply listened. "They expect perfection," he continued. "My family. My investors. The public. Every mistake I've ever made is remembered. Every success is never enough." His voice cracked slightly at the end and he fell silent, staring at the floor. Aaliyah took a careful step forward. "That sounds very lonely." He looked up, then really looked at her. His eyes were tired, unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. "It is," he said. The honesty of the moment hung between them, fragile and real. Without thinking too much, Aaliyah moved closer. Slowly, cautiously, as if giving him time to step away. When she reached him, she hesitated, then placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "If it's okay," she said, "you don't have to carry everything alone. Not all the time." He didn't answer. Instead, he stood abruptly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. For a brief second, Aaliyah worried she'd crossed a line. Then he did something unexpected. He wrapped his arms around her. The hug was careful, almost unsure, as if he hadn't held someone like this in a long time. Aaliyah froze for a heartbeat, then slowly returned the embrace, light and respectful. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't inappropriate. It was human. Joon-Woo let out a breath that sounded like relief. They stayed like that for only a moment, but it felt significant, like a dam cracking just enough to let the pressure ease. When he stepped back, he looked embarrassed but calmer. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Aaliyah replied quickly. "Everyone needs comfort sometimes." From that night on, things shifted. Joon-Woo began leaving his study earlier. He slept more. He laughed, softly, rarely but genuinely. Aaliyah noticed the change, though she never took credit for it. Their conversations deepened. He talked about his childhood, about how success had been demanded rather than celebrated. She shared stories of her family, of learning strength early and leaning on faith when life felt unfair. They didn't label what was happening between them. They didn't need to. But both of them felt it, a connection rooted not in desire but in trust. And as the walls around Joon-Woo's heart began to crack, something warmer started to grow in the space they left behind. There is a moment in every quiet love story when silence stops feeling safe. For Aaliyah Brooks, that moment arrived not with a confession or a dramatic turn, but with awareness, the slow, unsettling realization that her thoughts were beginning to follow Kang Joon-Woo even when he wasn't in the room. She noticed it in the smallest ways. In how she listened for his footsteps in the hallway. In how she worried when he skipped meals. In how his rare smiles stayed with her long after she returned to her room. None of it felt intentional. And that was what frightened her most. Aaliyah had learned early in life that boundaries were protection. Crossing them always came at a cost. And here she was, standing far too close to a line she had promised herself she would never approach. Joon-Woo felt it too. He tried to ignore the comfort her presence brought him, the way the house felt lighter when she was near. He reminded himself daily that she was his employee, that anything beyond professionalism would complicate everything. Still, he found himself seeking her out, asking her opinions, waiting for her quiet nod of understanding when the day weighed heavily on him. One afternoon, as they stood in the kitchen reviewing household arrangements, their hands brushed accidentally as they reached for the same paper. They both froze. "I'm sorry," Aaliyah said quickly, pulling her hand back. "So am I," Joon-Woo replied, his voice unusually tight. The air between them shifted, charged not with desire but with awareness. Neither spoke about it. They didn't need to. The unspoken truth hovered between them. This was no longer just kindness. That evening, Aaliyah avoided him. She finished her duties early and retreated to her room, heart racing with thoughts she didn't want to entertain. She reminded herself why she was here, to work, to earn, to survive. Not to fall for a man whose world was built on privilege and power. The next day, Joon-Woo noticed the distance immediately. "You're quiet today," he said as she set his tea down. "I'm just tired," she replied, eyes lowered. He studied her for a moment. "Have I done something wrong?" The question caught her off guard. "No," she said quickly. "Not at all." But her tone lacked conviction and he heard it. Later that night, he found her in the hallway folding linens. "Aaliyah," he said gently, "please talk to me." She hesitated, then finally looked up. "I'm trying to remember my place." The words landed harder than he expected. "Your place?" he echoed. "Yes," she said quietly. "This is your home. Your life. I work here. I don't want to misunderstand anything, or cause problems." Understanding dawned on his face, followed closely by guilt. "I never meant to make you uncomfortable," he said. "You've brought peace into my life, not problems." "That's exactly why I'm worried," she admitted. "Peace can turn into something else. And I can't afford to lose this job." Her honesty left him silent. For the first time, Joon-Woo was forced to confront the reality of their situation, not just emotionally but structurally. Power. Plus. Expectations. All the things love stories conveniently ignore. "I don't want to hurt you," he said finally. "Then we should be careful," Aaliyah replied. They stood there, the space between them heavier than before. When he stepped forward, it was not in haste but in respect. He opened his arms slowly, waiting. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. The hug they shared was brief but steady, two people holding on to each other while choosing restraint over impulse. When they pulled apart, something had changed again. They had acknowledged the line. And chosen for now to stand on opposite sides. But even as they walked away from each other that night, both of them knew one truth could no longer be denied. Whatever this was between them, it was real. Distance has a way of revealing truths people try hardest to avoid. For Kang Joon-Woo and Aaliyah Brooks, the careful space they created between themselves did not quiet their feelings, it sharpened them. Days passed with professional politeness and restrained conversations. The house returned to its earlier stillness, but this time the silence felt strained. Joon-Woo buried himself in work again, while Aaliyah focused on her duties with renewed discipline. They both believed they were doing the right thing. Yet the heart is rarely impressed by logic. The tension finally broke the afternoon. An article surfaced online. Aaliyah saw it accidentally while scrolling through her phone during a short break. Billionaire Kang Joon-Woo linked to new romantic interest. The headline read. Her chest tightened before she even opened it. The article was filled with speculation, old photographs, exaggerated timelines and careless assumptions. It painted Joon-Woo as the same man he had once been, careless, charming, incapable of real commitment. Aaliyah closed her phone slowly. So this was reality, she thought. The world he belonged to. The world she didn't. That evening she avoided him entirely. When she delivered his tea, she left it quietly and turned to leave. Aaliyah, he called out. She stopped but didn't turn. You've been distant again, he said. Please tell me why. She faced him then, holding her composure tightly. I saw the article. Confusion flickered across his face, followed quickly by understanding. That's not what it looks like, he said immediately. Isn't it? She asked softly. The world seems very sure about who you are. He stepped closer, urgency in his voice. The world doesn't know me. Not anymore. Then help me understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then gestured toward the chairs in the study. Sit. Please. They sat across from each other, the familiar space suddenly feeling vulnerable. I used to live exactly the way they describe, Joon-Woo admitted. I let people believe that version of me because it was easier. If they saw me as careless, they wouldn't expect anything real. Why? Aaliyah asked. Because expectations hurt, he said honestly. And because I didn't believe I deserved anything deeper. He looked at her then, eyes steady. Until you. The words were not dramatic. They were sincere. I haven't been with anyone since you came into this house, he continued. Not because you asked me to stop, but because I didn't want anything that felt empty anymore. Aaliyah listened, heart pounding. I was afraid to tell you, he said. Afraid you'd think I was manipulating you. Afraid I'd lose the one person who sees me without judgment. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I didn't know how to trust that, she admitted. Men like you. The world teaches women like me to be careful. He nodded slowly. You're right to be. Silence filled the room again, this time not with tension but clarity. Joon-Woo stood and moved toward her carefully. I don't expect anything from you. I only wanted you to know the truth. She stood too, unsure what came next. Without words, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. The hug was longer this time, steadier, full of understanding rather than fear. Thank you for telling me, she said quietly. He rested his chin lightly against her shoulder, exhaling. Thank you for believing me. When they pulled apart, something between them felt lighter. The truth had been spoken. And with it came a fragile, hopeful sense that whatever lay ahead, love or heartbreak, it would be built on honesty. Truth has a way of demanding action. Once spoken, it refuses to sit quietly in the background. For Kang Joon-Woo and Aaliyah Brooks, honesty became the turning point, the moment where feelings could no longer exist without intention. The days that followed their conversation felt different. Not lighter. Not easier. Clear. Joon-Woo began making visible changes, not for appearances but for alignment. He declined social invitations that once filled his calendar. He ended long-standing arrangements that no longer reflected the man he was becoming. Slowly, deliberately he reclaimed his time. Aaliyah noticed. She also noticed the whispers. Staff members spoke in lowered voices. Online commentary shifted, confused by his sudden withdrawal from public nightlife. The world didn't understand what was happening, and that uncertainty followed Aaliyah like a shadow. One evening she found herself standing in her room, staring at her packed suitcase. She hadn't told anyone yet. Not Mrs. Han. Not Joon-Woo. But she knew herself well enough to recognize fear when it knocked. The kind of fear that told her to leave before attachment turned into heartbreak. Later that night, Joon-Woo found her in the garden, sitting quietly beneath the lights. You're leaving, he said. It wasn't a question. She looked up, startled. I was going to tell you. Why? He asked gently. Because I don't belong here, she replied honestly. Because even when you change your life, the world won't change how it sees me. Or us. He sat beside her, close but not touching. I don't want you to go. That's not enough, she said softly. Wanting isn't choosing. The word struck him deeply. The next morning, everything changed. Joon-Woo called a meeting. Lawyers, advisors, his family. Decisions were made that surprised everyone, including himself. He announced he would no longer live according to expectations that drained him. He stepped back from public image games. He restructured his home staff policies. And then quietly he went to Aaliyah. I don't want you here because you work for me, he said. I want you here because you matter to me. She searched his face. And if I say no? Then I'll respect it, he replied without hesitation. But I needed you to know that I am choosing you. Not in secret. Not halfway. Aaliyah felt the weight of his words settle into her chest. I need time, she said. I'll give you all of it, he answered. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aaliyah made her decision. She didn't unpack her suitcase. She didn't leave either. Instead, she met Joon-Woo in the living room, heart steady despite the fear. I'll stay, she said. But not as someone hiding. Relief washed over his face. He opened his arms, not rushing, not assuming. She stepped into them. The hug they shared was quiet, grounding, a choice made together. For the first time, they were no longer standing on opposite sides of a line. They had crossed it. Together. Choosing each other did not make the world gentler. If anything, it invited resistance. Once Kang Joon-Woo stopped living the life people expected of him, questions followed. Then came opinions. And finally, opposition. Change was uncomfortable for those who benefited from the old version of him. Aaliyah felt the shift first within the walls of the house. The staff remained polite but watchful. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Smiles felt rehearsed. She told herself not to mind, yet each glance reminded her that love did not erase hierarchy. He stepped closer, reaching for her hands with care, holding them as though he never wanted to let go. Then let's do this together, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a promise. There were no grand stages, no endless witnesses, no dazzling public spectacle. Just the two of them standing together, hearts steady, trust fully earned and love fully chosen. Joon-Woo spoke quietly, clearly. Aaliyah, I want to spend my life with you. Not because it's expected, not because it looks perfect, but because you are my peace, my home, my choice every day. Aaliyah felt her chest tighten with emotion. All the doubts, all the fear, all the whispers of the world, none of it mattered anymore. She squeezed his hands. I choose you too. Not as someone's maid, not as a caretaker, not as someone who simply fits into your life. I choose us. The hug that followed was long, steady, and full of unspoken promises. It carried the weight of all the moments they had shared, the quiet mornings, the late-night conversations, the small acts of kindness, the first brave acknowledgement of feelings, the moments when walls had fallen. Pulling back just slightly, Joon-Woo rested his forehead against hers. Forever, then? Forever, she whispered back. The world outside could wait. Headlines could speculate. Family and society could have their opinions. Inside the walls of the Kang estate, they had already written their story. A story of patience, trust, and unwavering choice. They stood together in silence for a long moment, hands intertwined, hearts synchronized, knowing that the life they had built was not about wealth, status, or appearances. It was about love that had been nurtured, protected, and finally allowed to flourish. And in that quiet certainty, they both knew it. Their forever had already begun. Thank you for following Aaliyah and Joon-Woo's journey. Yellow Heart. If you love this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because some love stories deserve to be remembered, shared, and cherished forever.